there in podcast world. Hope you're having a good day. You're listening to or watching the Service Business Mastery Podcast. I'm your host, Tersh Blissett. Today we have Elliott Holland on the show. Excuse me, clear my throat there. And he is the founder of Guardian Due Diligence. And this is a really cool topic because we talk acquisition, and we've had like Patrick Lang on the show. We've had several people who have talked acquisitions on the show before, but Elliott's kind of like the godsend that I've been looking for, honestly, because I have tons of questions before we actually acquire a business that I'm relying on people like Patrick or your business broker to kind of answer those questions. And sometimes Patrick's an honest guy, so he's definitely not one of these people, but there are definitely brokers out there that they just want to get the business sold. So they're going to tell you what they want to hear. And Elliott's the kind of guy that comes in and does the due diligence behind the other business that you're purchasing. And so I honestly didn't even know a guy like Elliott existed. And before we started recording, he said that that's not uncommon, but I'm super excited to pick his brain here for the next 20 or 30 minutes. And I hope you learned something here from the show. But with that being said, welcome to the show, Elliott.
So glad to be here. It's interesting. You focusing on HVAC. I think I mentioned I've done 3 HVAC deals in the past 12 months. So very interested in this conversation. And then with your deal particularly, I think this is going to be an amazing chat.
Yeah. So for those of you who are new to the podcast, or maybe haven't followed along for a while, back in 2018, I quote unquote, I'm using air quotes here, purchased a business, and basically I purchased this bad debt. And because the numbers that were originally allotted, we were presented that he was generating closer to $750,000. When we dove down deep into the numbers, it was more like 225,000. And based on the bad debt that we ended up doing, Elliot and I were just talking that whenever I tell people, we purchased a bad debt, we didn't go by multiples of EBITDA or anything. And he was like, actually, if you run numbers, you were doing that. And I love some of the things that you mentioned even after that. But with that being said, give us a little background about you, what makes you an expert, and why someone should hire someone like you when they already have a business broker. Because business brokers, they're not like a real estate broker. I mean, a realtor necessarily, but we can kind of compare that because that's what we know. And
Very
we
similar.
also know that realtors, they don't have to have a ton of training, like super know your numbers and be able to inspect a building or anything like that. Right. So it's kind of like that with a business broker in that fashion. So tell us just your background and what makes you an expert and everything.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think like the best NBA coaches are former players.
Yeah.
So for me, I spent the past 10 years and 6 of the 10 in the seat of buying businesses. So I did it for private equity firms on Wall Street. I did it for myself with a business partner. I did it for myself with no business partner. And through those 6 years, I saw almost 1,000 deals consummated seen a lot of things. And then for the past 4 years, I've ran Guardian Due Diligence, where we advise others and vet companies for investors who are looking to make purchases. So all in all, 10 years in this industry. And I think for most people who have spent 10 years in something specific, they understand the mastery that comes from seeing so much stuff. Mm-hmm. So the reason I'm an expert is the player coach kind of component. And just quickly what we do, because you made a great point. And I'll go through this quickly. Yeah. When people sell businesses, they typically sell them for a multiple of cash flow. In this part of the market, 2 to 5 times cash flow or EBITDA is typically about right. And what ends up happening is each dollar of EBITDA or cash flow that a seller is able to convince a buyer that's there that isn't, they don't get dollar for dollar benefit. They get 2 to 5 times that benefit. So if I convince you $100,000 of cash flows in this business and it's not, you don't pay me $100,000. as the seller, you pay me $200,000 to $500,000.
Nice.
So it creates an environment where the sellers in these situations have probably the highest motivation ever to, air quotes, tell stories.
Uh-huh.
And so my business is to vet the numbers, vet the financials, vet the operation, to find all those stories that are being told so that buyers don't get into situations where they buy bad businesses.
Mm-hmm.
And so what ends up happening oftentimes, to your point, there's business brokers that are in this marketplace, but typically the business brokers work for the seller.
Yeah.
And they get paid a portion of the deal.
Mm-hmm.
So think about the motivation of a person that works for the guy who has the incentive to tell a story, who gets paid a portion of the story being told. Does that person work for the buyer?
Right. And I've even had, we had a business was presented to me, and I felt like the numbers were inflated. And so I went to my buddy who's a business broker and said, hey, I want you to be on my behalf and look at these numbers and tell me if it's legit or not. And he's like, I'll try, but this isn't normal. I'm like, what do you mean it's not normal? I want my own realtor, and they have their real, that's what the mindset that I'm thinking.
Yes.
And the other guy's like, I don't think I'm going to split this with you, like to my guy. And I was like, how am I protected in this scenario? This seems like I'd get screwed so fast.
You did my pitch for me.
I mean, it's legit exactly what I've experienced. So I can say, like,
there's nobody protecting the buyers. And even the people who have seemingly the expertise, you just, so if I'm sitting in that broker seat, what he probably was trying to tell you but didn't want to tell you, I don't know how to check the numbers. I just sell stuff, dude.
Yeah.
So can I, but can I get into the numbers in a way that is material for the deal? No. And then also I can't tell you that because it undermines my whole sort of credibility as a professional to an extent. And then the other thing is, like in real estate, the two brokers split the transaction. Well, the sell side broker, the one working for the seller, was the one who sold the business. He's not splitting with anyone.
Yeah.
You have to pay your buy side broker, which gets people into a bit of a tizzy. But then it's sort of like, well, how quickly do you want to throw 60, 100, $250,000 down the tubes?
Exactly.
So it can be, because there is no buy-side realtor that gets paid in traditional transactions, the buyer must decide whether they know enough to vet the numbers, whether they just are willing to take a chance without the numbers being vetted, or whether they pay for an expert like myself and Guardian Due Diligence to vet. And depending on the size of the deal and how confident you are in the numbers, you make a bet. And, we're $10,000, $15,000 to get a project done. So the question around, you're putting up 60, is it worth 10? You're putting up 100, is it worth, you got to kind of decide.
Well, I think what I did was Brandon, he'll actually be on the show in a couple of weeks. Maybe it might even be next week, but he is a realtor, not a realtor. I'm sorry. He's a banker with Live Oak, and he's done a lot of business acquisition, money changing hands and stuff. And so I kind of put it in his ballpark too. And I was like, hey, does these numbers make sense to even get a loan and that kind of thing? And so that's kind of how I had to rely, because I didn't have anybody, I didn't have your number on speed dial at that time. So I really didn't know what the best route was to take. I ended up not pulling the trigger because I still just had this gut feeling that something wasn't exactly on the up and up. But that was 2 years ago, maybe. And I think that business actually might still be for sale too. So it is wild how much insecurity comes along with that. And then like in the Facebook groups, like the HVAC Facebook groups, there's guys that are just like, every time you turn around, they're like, yeah, we purchased another one. We're acquiring another one. We're acquiring one in this town. I'm like, what in the hell? Like, how's this happening? Like, I'm trying to get my head wrapped around one acquisition and you're talking about doing 3 in a month or something crazy,
And it all depends. So when I was buying companies, I was a financial buyer who understood how to vet the numbers myself.
Mm-hmm.
So then I'm buyer and diligence provider in one. So
Yeah.
I'm wearing both hats. In my advisor seat, I'm helping and augmenting people who don't have the diligence and financial lens to help them. And so a person who's not financial and a guy like me can do 3 deals in a month because we can
Yeah.
vet 3 deals and it's not that big of a deal. If you get through 1 or 2 deals with me, you may be able to vet your own deal after that to a larger extent. And so oftentimes I sort of work myself out of a job, but I'm okay with that. There's plenty of buyers in the market. And
Yeah.
then here's the other thing. People say a bunch of stuff on Facebook that's not true.
Yeah. Good point. Good point.
I'm in a lot of those same groups on other business buying contexts and business selling contexts. And some of the stuff I see is just like people's Porsche truck that they just bought and they're selling you on a class.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
No deed, no title. Just, I promise you it's mine.
Yeah, right, right. They just rented it for a couple hours, take a picture with it. No, dude, that's awesome, man. So at what point do we bring you into the conversation? Is it like, hey, I'm looking at buying this company, they've given me an NDA or a non-disclosure agreement and I've signed it, here's the numbers, does this make sense? Or is it after we've already put in the offer? Because sometimes, like especially first time people that are buying it, maybe it's like your competitor down the street's going out of business or talking about retiring and you want to acquire them and you've never done this process before. When do we
Sure.
bring you in?
So 2 different times. The time that most people choose is when they are about to submit a letter of intent or an offer on the business.
Okay.
So when things get real, when you've gotten past the non-disclosure, you've looked at the business, you talked to your friends, you figured out you have the capital. Now you're going to put a letter to say, I'm going to pay $1 million for this business. I'm going to pay it to you this way. That's typically when people get us involved.
Mm-hmm.
And we focus in those engagements primarily on purely just vetting the numbers of the business.
Yeah.
But I think what I recommend people do is get us involved earlier.
Okay.
And so for people who are just starting off particularly, or this may be one of their first 20 deals they're looking at, look at the NDA, send it over, get the book on the business, give us a shout. We have weekly office hours from 12 to 1 on Fridays, East Coast time,
Yeah.
where you can ask questions about your deals. So you can even get that advice for free. Help us help you think through deals, because my knowledge tells me that people spend like 90% of their deal evaluation time looking at terrible deals.
Yeah.
And you don't get that time back. So for
Right.
someone to be able to tell you, hey, this looks baloney in 2 weeks,
Mhm.
might save you 2 months of going around town asking others. And that 2 months can be spent on other deals. So you can still get the benefit of it. I mean, I'm talking to a guy right now that's looking at buying a business out of Tampa. And the seller's a salesperson, right? So he sells stuff online and he's really good at selling and he talks really quickly and things sort of make sense a little bit, but not at all. And I'm basically telling him this week that the deal's baloney, and that's probably going to save him 6 months of his life. So I encourage people to get us involved sooner in the process. And we have sort of mechanisms through our weekly office hours that make it pretty easy to engage.
So what are those real quick? Because I'll ask you again when we wrap up, but I'd like to get them right now too.
Yeah, 12 p.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern every Friday. We spend an hour answering sort of client submitted or just interested party submitted questions. So this Friday, I've got 4 or 5 questions from folks who have come by my website, Guardian Due Diligence. They've submitted a question. I've sent them a Zoom link. We're going to hop on the phone and we'll just talk through their questions, talk through how to think about it, talk through the different negotiations, talk through what to be thinking about. And it gives people a chance to understand the benefit of having an expert on your side, because like you, Tersh, like you may have recognized you needed a expert, but when it came time to pay, you might have said, how much is it worth? Right. And what I find is that people before the calls don't quite get it. But once we get into the deep level of detail in the calls, and also when I highlight that, so you're going to pay 4 times what this story is to this guy, and you don't know how to vet it, you tell me how much,
Right.
how much you willing to spend on $1 million personal guarantee on a live owned debt where they're going to come take your house and ruin your
Yeah.
life if you
Right.
don't pay them back. You tell me how much that's worth.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I agree with that. So what happens if they've already put in an offer? Say we put in an offer for $1 million, and then you go through the numbers and you're like, hey, look, you shouldn't be paying more than 400,000 for this business or something like that. Like,
Sure.
how do you present? How does that conversation happen?
So first we would call you and say, hey, look, the typical multiples for businesses in this industry are 3 times.
Mm-hmm.
So you went into this and they told you that the EBITDA was $333,000. You offered $1 million. It made sense based on what you saw. The EBITDA is really, $170,000. So this
Mm-hmm.
thing's worth $500,000. So
Mm-hmm.
here's the data to back it up. Help me understand if you heard something that I didn't see that maybe adjust this at all.
Mm-hmm.
And then the benefit of working with us versus other groups is we'll actually help you negotiate the price reduction. So maybe we'll say, hey, you should get us on the phone with the seller.
Yeah.
Let's just first off talk through the numbers and level set on this is really $170,000 worth of cash flow and not 333. Because once we get there, then you sort of get off the phone and say, okay, now what do we do about it?
Yeah.
And that becomes a negotiation. And then there's oftentimes many different ways to adjust. So you can just adjust the purchase price down outright. You can say, hey, I'll pay you $500,000. And if the business performs at a certain level, I'll pay you the other half out of cash flows of the business after I buy it.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you think it's worth $1 million, I'll buy half of it. And then I'm only taking on half the risk.
Mm-hmm.
And if the business gets to the size that you say it's going to be, then we'll pay you out for it. Mm-hmm. If not, that half purchase becomes a full purchase. So ask them if they're going to bet.
Okay. Yeah. So they
the
leverage their, like, okay, are you calling BS? Like, if you're going to stand behind it, like, all right, put your money where your mouth's at.
Yeah, because I tell people all the time, you should not be betting against the seller. Somebody who's been in the business for 10, 20 years absolutely knows it better than you.
Yeah.
They know it better than me. And so if they're not willing to bet on the outcome, you shouldn't be betting on the outcome.
Right. Yeah. They've seen the trends. If they've been in the industry that long, they've seen the ebbs and flows of it. Now, if it's a business that's 5 years or 10 years old, maybe you haven't seen all the ebbs and flows necessarily, but definitely if they've been in that long, they've seen it. The full cycles. I mean, even this current cycle that we're going through, like the trends were a lot longer than they had been in the past. And, but they're coming. I mean, you can see them, over the past year. And so, but with that being said, what's kind of the red flags that you look for? Like, what's one thing that you're like, people try and stick this in to make it seem like there's more cash flow than there isn't, than there actually is?
In this part of the market, the biggest ones are the seller's always absentee.
Okay.
The guy has an office. He
Yeah.
lives in the house that the business is in, but I promise you, he never spends a day or a minute of time. It runs without me.
Yeah.
And so
I'd love to see all your policies and procedures if you're able to make it run completely without you.
Yeah. And then why would you have a business co-located with your living quarters that is absentee, right? If it really ran without you, you'd probably move the location. You'd also probably have a lieutenant in there that had a title that was better than service manager, know?
Right.
But I digress. The thing there is that what people do is they have add backs. So they say, hey, look, on the taxes, we reported, $10,000 of profit, but really I'm an absentee owner. I pull $150,000 out of this business.
So I want to stick that back in there.
Right. And then you got to evaluate, is the guy absentee? And I promise you, they'll die on that vine telling you, because they get 3 times that in valuation. I can actually determine whether they are absentee or not pretty quickly. So that's
how about if they give their service manager the title of controller or something like that? Have you seen that before? Where they've inflated titles.
Inflated titles, but also controllers that can't count to 10. A lot of times controllers are dating the owner. So then how much can you trust the numbers? And then also you're in the precarious situation of asking questions to a person that lays next to the seller. So be careful, buddy.
I didn't even think about that. I didn't even think about that. Yeah.
You because your number one relationship is with the seller, even if you don't believe what they're saying. And so blowing them up through their
good
person
point.
can blow up your deal before you have a chance to negotiate. So consider that. The other thing about controllers is that they're not going to tell you they don't know. So you have to figure it out. The other thing that happens, you'll assume oftentimes, or people assume rather, oh, well, they get their taxes done by a CPA. So the CPA checked them.
Right.
For $100 a year. You think a CPA checked $1 million business?
Yeah.
Receipts, invoices.
Yeah.
Those people on their reports, they'll say it, but nobody reads the page-long disclosures. It basically says we didn't check a gosh darn thing. We took everything the seller gave us to be the truth. You cannot rely on this. This is just representative data we got in. You have no financial or legal recourse against us for anything presented on page 3 through X.
Yeah.
Enjoy. So
have fun with these numbers.
That's another one. I think the third one, just to be brief, is people can say anything in their financials through QuickBooks. I've been in QuickBooks.
Yeah.
I can tell you all kinds of stories in QuickBooks. Taxes are typically to minimize taxes, right? Nobody wants to overpay Uncle Sam. So they're typically understated in terms of they typically say less profit than the business actually has. The bank statements don't tell lies. You can't go into a bank and say, hey, I'm going to give you $100, but I want you to say on my bank statement that I have $200. So people, I think, miss the fact that the bank statements are arguably the best document to understand the true cash flows in and out of the business. And
are they required to disclose all bank statements? Or
no.
are all bank accounts? Because like we have multiple bank accounts, but if you only looked at one of them, you might see like either good or bad numbers.
Yeah, no, not at all. So that's where due diligence comes in. So simple example, you could give me 30 different industries and I could tell you the average profit margin. Like before we started, you said HVAC, I was like about 10% margin. You were like, if you're lucky.
Yeah.
I know the margins on those businesses are 5 to 18, maybe 20%.
Yeah, right.
If I see one at 40%, I know there's a bank statement missing, right? I know.
Okay.
Somebody else may not know. And so what you do is you reconcile the financial statements to the bank statements. So what ends up happening is, say you're looking at an HVAC company, right? And they've got high profits. You're trying to figure it out. And you're like, wait, I don't see any payments to train.
Yeah, right.
Where are you getting your equipment from?
Right.
Oh, oops, I forgot about this bank statement over here.
Yeah.
I was going to tell you about it. So you have to sort of look, wait, where's your payroll?
Yeah.
I don't see payroll on here, right? Hey, wait, where's your rent? So when you sort of know how the income statement should look, you can look for the big items and ask where they are. The other thing is it's easy to tell a story on one set of financials, like on the taxes or the financials. It's really hard to tell them on the taxes, the financials, and the bank statements. So what we do is we reconcile all three, and then it's very seldom that we miss significant pieces of the financial picture.
Gotcha. Cool, man. So where can everybody reach out to learn more about you and even get signed up with your program or get you on board with them?
Yeah, guardianduediligence.com. That's D spelled D-U-E. And just come onto the website. Like I said, we have weekly office hours from 12 to 1 p.m. Eastern time every Friday. And so the easiest way to engage is just to, on our website, you can ask to be added to the office hour Zoom call, and then you can submit a question. And that's probably the easiest way to engage. You can also book time with me on my website. So that's a possibility too.
Okay.
But I'm very responsive there, and either myself or one of my assistants will get back to you quickly.
Sweet, man. I really appreciate all this information, and I'm glad we got connected because I had no idea that you even existed. And it is really cool knowing that there is somebody there that can be on our side whenever it comes to, vetting a business for sure.
I love to help people. Of course I'm in business, but I also enjoy the work that I do.
Yeah.
So I very much love to help anyone that I can. So I'm looking forward to hearing from folks in your network, and Tersh, thanks for having me here on the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And anybody that has any questions, don't forget guardianduediligence.com. Reach out to Elliott, his team, learn more. If you are looking at purchasing a business, acquiring a business, I plead with you, don't make the costly mistakes that even I've made in the past, and lots of people who have purchased businesses have made. There are a lot of very intelligent business brokers out there, but whenever you like, to take it HVAC for an example, like there are really, really good new construction guys. There's really, really good service guys. There's really, really good indoor air quality guys and gals. So they're just another tool in your tool bag, in your arsenal. And so I plead with you to definitely use Elliott. I'm not calling you a tool, Elliott.
Oh no, I am a tool as a business owner. So I'm raising my hand. Use me.
Yeah.
Also, just so you guys can make it simple, think about who the advisors you're working for or listening to, who pays them.
Good point.
That's who they're working for, no matter what they tell you. You want
Yep.
somebody working for you that you're paying, that's watching your back. You don't want to go into a crazy crowd with security that the artist paid for. You want to go with your security guard.
That's exactly right, man. That's a good point. I appreciate you being on the show, man. And I appreciate everybody that's listening to this episode or watching it. If you have any questions, don't forget to reach out to Elliott or reach out to myself. Tersh at serviceemperor.com is probably the easiest way to get in touch with me. I'm on all the social media too. So it's at Tersh Blissa everywhere, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. But with that being said, I hope you have a wonderful day. Stay safe and happy acquisitions. Like just purchase up some businesses, buy them up.
Happy acquisitions. I like that.
All right, guys. Y'all be good. See ya.
Take care.